HeroQuest. Deep inside another dimension, face battling barbarians and evil magic on a quest for adventure in a maze of monsters. This is HeroQuest, the fantasy adventure game. Once you get into it, you'll never be the same. HeroQuest.
Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. So that was, in fact, the voice of the late actor Christopher Lee, doing the voiceover for a 1991 HeroQuest commercial. That was the version in the UK. We got a different narrator in the United States. Of course, Christopher Lee, one of the most impressive and interesting people to have ever lived. War hero, World War II hero, British spy, Nazi hunter. He was basically the real-life James Bond. And then becoming an actor, he cut a heavy metal album as a lead singer of a heavy metal group. And, of course, he got to play Saruman, Dracula, and a Sith Lord, among many other roles over the course of his career. So, yeah, Christopher Lee was pretty cool. But we're not here to talk about Christopher Lee. We're here to talk about, once again, HeroQuest. I thought I would do an episode a little more detailed just on HeroQuest. I did the unboxing, and I realized there may be some context missing for anybody who's not familiar with the game. So I thought I'd give a little overview of the game and a little bit of how it sort of actually kind of somewhat related to how I got back into doing old school D&D as sort of a source of inspiration. And then there's actually a couple of mechanics you might take from HeroQuest and might consider putting them in a dungeon crawl when you're playing old school style games. But first I want to take some calls from people who called in about the unboxing. And really the idea, you're going to hear from Carl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents. You're going to hear a call from Jason Connolly of Nerds RPG Variety Cast. And then finally you're going to hear a call from Minyan, also known as Rob, who is the host of the We Timorous Bushi podcast. I still think that's one of the best names for a podcast I've ever heard. I love that. But you'll hear a call from him about HeroQuest. It actually speaks to kind of, a little bit of what made me think about maybe doing a longer episode on HeroQuest instead of just responding to calls in another episode. So let's get to the calls, and then we'll get into a little more description of the game.
Hey, BJ. Thank you for your overview of HeroQuest. I'm sorry I don't really get board games. I think I've just had too many bad experiences with professional, quote-unquote, board game players that play at all the cons, that meta a game when you're trying to learn it and kind of say, this is how you win, and this is how we're going to win, and it's just kind of, not fun to do. I'd hear when on the week that I missed, when I was out of town, my gaming group played Gloomhaven and they really enjoyed it. So maybe these are kind of different. But it'd be cool to set up and play maybe one of these days and get that foul taste of board games and board gamers out of my brain.
Hey, Carl, thanks for the call. Yeah, I think whenever you take, there are hobbies that the people who get interested in a hobby of role-playing games, there's a high overlap with war games, with collectible card games like Magic the Gathering, and with video games. The minute you add a competitive element, though, and that's why one of the reasons I never really got into Magic, and it took me a long time to get into war games too, was because I didn't want to add that competitive element into. I liked the cooperative nature of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games, and when I wanted to scratch that, do some cool stuff, with fantasy characters, I didn't want to add competing with even friendly competition into that for some reason. I'm not a highly competitive person with other people. I much more enjoy cooperation. When I want to achieve something, it's usually about having a goal to achieve, not necessarily that, well, someone else did this, so I need to do it better. And so that's probably why I like role-playing games to begin with. But yeah, when you add that competitive element into something, a role-playing game like a role-playing game adjacent, it can become aggravating. Because you're always going to have some people who can handle it as a friendly competition, some people who are just there to hang out and have fun. They don't care who wins. But then there's some people that once you make it a competition, that kind of starts to color everything, and that's really their bottom goal. And I don't think I've mentioned in the podcast, but I have mentioned, I think, some of our discussions on Discord that I originally had a kind of a bad taste in my mouth about Warhammer. Because my initial introduction to Warhammer were, probably more than just this, but it was sort of, how do you get into Warhammer? Well, read the rules and then find an experienced Warhammer player and let him kick your butt over and over again until the light bulb comes on. And it wasn't very, the first place I encountered it was not very friendly or welcoming. Fortunately, about 15 years ago or so, I got in with a group of guys who I was playing D&D with, that then said, like, hey, man, play Warhammer with us. And they showed me how to set up an army and gave me pinpointed ideas, and I still lost most of the game because I was a newbie. But, they didn't just stomp me without me being able to sort out what they were doing and how they were beating me. And it was a much more friendly introduction, and we all had a good time. So, I don't know if any of those guys have caught on or listened to my podcast out there, but Madison and Kirby and Adam, if you guys are listening, thank you again for bringing me into Warhammer back in the day. And I kind of had big plans to sort of get into it again, and then COVID hit, and it kind of shut down in-person gaming with some of my friends here locally. So maybe it'll come back. Anyway, that being said, and Warhammer is important as I get into talking more about HeroQuest. There's a link there. But HeroQuest is not a competitive game. It's very much a dungeon crawl game, and I'll talk a little more about that. So maybe you'll enjoy it. As I mentioned in the unboxing, I've ran it. Through. I mean, I've been able to set it up. The rules are simple enough that I was able to set it up in Fantasy Grounds and run it with some friends online. So maybe sometime we can play through a couple of scenarios and give you a taste of it, and you might find you enjoy it. Anyway, thanks for the call. Next up, we've got a call from Jason Connerly.
Hey, Jason here. Really enjoyed the HeroQuest episode. HeroQuest isn't a game I had back in the day. I don't know when it had come out. Did it come out in the 90s? I was already in the Army probably by the time it came out. I did end up buying Warhammer Quest. In fact, I still have 2 copies of Warhammer Quest. I have everything for Warhammer Quest. Really enjoy that game. HeroQuest just never called to me. I mean, I kind of vaguely knew when it was out, but like I say, I was already out and about as an adult, and it wasn't a co-op game or a game you could play solo. I did buy a set, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, and I had it, a box set of it, and then the game, and then I sold it a few years ago to somebody for about what I paid for it, and but. I don't know. I'm glad it has resonance for you guys. And I'm glad you're able to get it, and I'm glad you're happy with the purchase. So, thank you for doing that unboxing.
Hey, Jason. HeroQuest was released in 1989. It made it 8 years on the market through 97 before it went out of production. And I believe Runehammer. Let's talk about Runehammer. I love that guy. No, I think Warhammer Quest is a direct descendant. It's the next iteration of that game, and a lot of that similar family of board games grew out of HeroQuest. And again, there is I'll talk more, as I mentioned in my response to Carl, about the connection between Warhammer and HeroQuest here in a minute. But yeah, I hope you got a good price for that. I know you may have. He was kind of the background talking during the unboxing, but my friend Jerry had mentioned he had sold a box set a few years ago, and he got like over $300 for it. So they're highly collectible. I've got my old box. I'm actually going to look at it as I describe the contents for just explaining the game. My original box set, not my new one. I I only got this one a few years ago. I managed to get it on eBay before the prices started skyrocketing. So it's in pretty good shape, but you can tell that it's, 30-year-old game. Anyway, I think love to have, like I mentioned to Carl, getting an online game set up at some point to showcase it for maybe some people who've never played before and see what it's like. But yeah, thanks for calling in, and I will talk to you again later.
Hey, thanks for the mega episode on the unboxing of HeroQuest. This is Menion, also known as Rob, by the way. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. Yeah, it takes me back. I think when that came out, our attention had started to flag with the old D&D, but that kind of reignited that excitement that we had about delving into these, down these corridors and getting treasure. And I think we went back to D&D quite big after that, probably 2nd edition. Anyway, great stuff, yeah. Doesn't sound cheap, but it sounds like you got your money's worth, so that's what matters, eh? Anyway, I'm still listening. I'm doing what is known in the business as a Daniel Norton, but don't tell anybody.
Thanks for calling, Rob. I appreciate it. And I think we probably have a similar feeling towards HeroQuest. I didn't get it when it first came out. I got a used copy later on and really enjoyed it, and have enjoyed playing it. But I think when I got particularly this copy I have now, the original, that sort of got me a little bit itching for some classic dungeon crawls, and that's what led me to pull out my Mold Van Cook box sets and start flipping through those for ideas, and really kind of got me to say, you know what, I think I'm going to run an old school D&D campaign. And of course, Old School Essentials has been released in the midst of me planning that out. So I've been using primarily the Old School Essentials rule set, but that is, of course, just BX D&D. But yeah, it did kind of inspire me to start thinking about some older school games with some simple mechanics. You can use the rules for HeroQuest for a really mini role-playing game if you just want to add the role-playing aspects to it. I would think, I don't know if it would make for a long-term campaign, but it might make for a little mini one, because the characters do improve from one quest to the next and gain new treasure and gear and things like that. So, I appreciate you. I appreciate the sentiment, and I appreciate the call. And yeah, it was a bit of a chunk of money to get it, but I think it comes down to about $1.50 a miniature. So that's not a bad when you consider everything you got. It was just a big upfront investment rather than collecting it piecemeal. The new one, I mean, it is not the classic one. Thanks for the call. Hope things are going well for you over there in Japan, and please call back in the future anytime anything that I bring up or that sounds interesting catches your attention. Let's talk for a minute a little bit about what the game is for people who aren't familiar with HeroQuest. HeroQuest is not a competitive board game. It's a dungeon crawl game. I don't know if there were any quite like this before. I guess there was Dungeon from back in the 70s that TSR put out, where your job is to go into the dungeon and get out with as much treasure as possible. That was much more of a board game and not a role-playing game, although it was co-created by Gary Gygax and published by TSR. HeroQuest came from Milton Bradley initially, which is why Hasbro is publishing the new one, because they've since acquired Milton Bradley. I think eventually Hasbro is going to own all things gaming at some point. All games and toys. But HeroQuest, you have a board, and it's a kind of a generic dungeon board, but in each scenario, parts of that board get blocked off and the doors get rearranged so that you're really playing on only minor sections of the board in different configurations. And you can find pictures of this and videos about this online if you want to. So you've got a different kind of dungeon with each scenario. And the original book had, let me look here, 14 quests of increasing difficulty. And so one player has to play the role of a game master. They don't call it a game master, but you've got a little screen that's got the essential rules on the back and some artwork on the front that you set behind. Technically, it says you're playing Zargon. Zargon is this powerful evil sorcerer who is the adversary. But I think in the spirit of the game, it's not like you're trying to. It's not you playing against the players. It's you're just as a typical game master, or just running the scenarios and having the monsters do what seems logical and natural to them. The game comes with some tiles and some furniture, doors and tables. There's a cupboard. There's a torture rack. There's an alchemist table. There's a sorcerer's table with a open book, spell book. There's a tomb or a crypt, and you in different scenarios you find these are just kind of there to kind of decorate the rooms that you go into as you move your game piece through the board. And so again, players don't know what's in the room till they open the door, and then the Zargon or the game master puts the furniture and the creatures in the room that are going to be there. And so it is very much. It's very much if you ever played a dungeon crawl in D&D where you're not really in character, and you're just like I'm going to open the door and see what's in there. There's a goblin. What are you going to do? Well, I attack the goblin, or I run away, or I cast a spell. It's just that it's the dungeon crawl aspect of D&D without the role playing. So you kind of make it into a role playing game if you really wanted to. As I mentioned just a minute ago, it probably wouldn't be good for a long term campaign or a huge overarching thing, but for a little mini campaign, you might even be able to do that. Just if you wanted to have your character, your missions are predefined, your objectives are predefined, so there's it's kind of a campaign on rails. So I don't know how much role playing will really enhance. You aren't going to make any choices like that. But so you got a board. There are different scenarios that the game master sets up, and then you move your pieces around the board and you open doors and see what's in there. And usually you've got some kind of objective that you're trying to get. The game does have a little bit of a narrative opening. There's a wizard named Mentor who is featured a lot of times in the yard. He's got a big white beard and a red cape, who is keeps an eye on Zargon and to prevent Zargon from destroying the world. And the book gives you a little bit of a history of the rivalry between Zargon and Mentor. Again, it's just like one page in a zine-sized instruction booklet just to kind of set the tone. So it's a themed board game. And so there are 14 quests you have to complete. Each of you must complete 14 quests. If you do this, you will become the acclaimed champions of the realm and dubbed Imperial Knights. And then you go through each quest. And the quest gets successively more challenging. So how you run your characters, there are 4 kinds of characters. There's a barbarian. You are the barbarian, the greatest warrior of all, but beware of magic. Your sword is no defense against it. And so the barbarian's primary thing is to attack. You can't cast spells. Here's everything. Let me back up a second. Here's everything a hero can do on their turn. You can attack an adjacent monster. You can cast a spell. You can search the room you're in for treasure. You can search the room for secret doors. Or if you're in a corridor, you can also search for secret doors. You can search the room or corridor for traps. And you can disarm a trap on the square you are on if you have tools. You have to have a toolkit. And there's a little bit of a... I think when you start off, you really just got a weapon. As you gather treasure in the first scenario, there's a little... It's printed on one of the box inserts. There is an armory where you can buy a toolkit. You can buy different types of swords, a shield, upgrades in armor. So every character kind of starts with one weapon. But the barbarian starts with a broadsword. Doesn't have any armor on to begin with. You're gonna have to find some treasure to come back and buy some armor if you want them for your barbarian. And they're playing in the reason this is a barbarian and not just warrior or fighter or something like that is I think at the time they're really trying to play up the, this is the late 80s, the Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Conan is sort of fresh in everybody's mind, and the barbarian character and all the artwork looks like Conan, particularly the Arnold Schwarzenegger version of Conan. And so you're the barbarian, the greatest warrior of all, and your main role is to fight monsters. You're the tank, I guess. Barbarian can't cast spells. There's a dwarf, so you could also play a dwarf. The dwarf starts with a short sword, no armor, but can wear armor. You're the dwarf, you're a good warrior, and have the unique ability to disarm traps without a toolkit. So the dwarf is important, particularly in the first scenario, because it's the only character that everybody can find the trap, but the dwarf can actually disarm the trap, so you don't have to try to jump over it or go around it. You got an elf, also starts with a short sword and no armor. You're an elf, a master of both magic and sword. You use both well. You must use both well if you're to triumph. And they have 3 magical spells. And then you have the wizard. The wizard starts with a dagger, and also no armor, and they cannot wear armor. You're the wizard. You have the power to cast many different spells. In combat, you're weak. You can't wear armor or use large weapons. You must use your spells wisely and avoid physical combat. The wizard is going to have 9 spells. And how this works is there are 12 spells in the game. They are divided up by elements. So there are 3 water, 3 fire, 3 earth, and 3 air. And what happens, I believe, the elf gets 1 set of these spells, and then the wizard is going to get the other 3. And I think when you start play, the wizard picks one, assuming it's different players. Well, you can just play with one player, and that player can play all 4. You really need all 4 of them to get through the scenarios. The only time I've ever seen anybody really fail the first scenario was when we only had a couple of players and they decided not to use all 4 characters. But I think the wizard picks 1 element, then the elf picks 1 element, and the wizard gets the remaining 2 elements by default. So, for example, the air, Swift Wind. This spell may be cast on any one hero, including yourself. Its powerful burst of energy enables that hero to roll twice as many red dice. So there are red dice that you roll to see how far you move, how many squares you get to move on your turn. So Swift Wind, it's kind of like haste. Tempest. The spell creates a small whirlwind that envelops a monster of your choice. The monster will then miss on its next turn, so it prevents the attack. Genie. The spell conjures a genie, which will do one of the following: open any door on the board, or will use 5 combat dice to attack any monster within your line of sight. So, and then there's some other kinds of healing spells and buffing spells and things that would be pretty familiar to anyone who's played D&D. They're not using the D&D names, but you'll recognize them. There's also a deck of chaos spells. Some of them are the same as some of them overlap with the like Tempest. It overlaps with the hero spells, but there's some like summon orcs and summon undead that are unique. And as you get into the more advanced scenarios, you do have to combat sorcerers or warlocks. I think they're called warlocks in the old one. They've changed the name of them to sorcerer I believe in the new version of the game. There's a card for every monster with its type of monster and its stats. Not every monster. There are several, because you got multiple orcs and zombies and things like that. 3 of the opponents you face, though, are Famir, Chaos Warrior, and the Chaos Warlock. Is that what it's called? Let me double check in this rule book, because it's been a while since I looked at this old one. But these are clearly Warhammer. Chaos Warlock. These are clearly Warhammer these are Warhammer sculpts and these old minis. They are Citadel miniatures for the game, and it is tapping into the Warhammer sort of style magic and Warhammer style characters that you're looking at in this game. So it's a dungeon crawl that has a little bit of, you can see some D&D in it, but it's thematically more the Warhammer's old world. And so, and at the end, you fight the Witch Lord, which is just a souped-up version of the Chaos Warlock. Now, because that's Games Workshop IP, in the new HeroQuest, they've replaced the Fimir with abominations. And you heard in the unboxing video, these Fimir look like Fimir from Warhammer, some kind of weird, strange lizard folk kind of creature. In the new one, they look like fishmen. They look like humanoid piranhas, or probably the closest thing in D&D would be to Kuatoa. The Chaos Warrior is now a Dread Warrior, and the Chaos Warlock is now called a Dread Sorcerer. But other than that, the hero characters that you play are still the Barbarian, the Dwarf, the Elf, and the Wizard. They added 3 in the bonus content for the new one, as I'd mentioned, that is a Warlock. So when you hear Warlock in new HeroQuest, that's not the Chaos Warlock. That is a hero that is a kind of a D&D style Warlock. The description and the spells make it clear that this is a character who's made a pact with some kind of some sort of spooky otherworldly entity, a demon of some sort. And then they've added a druid and a bard as well. And those characters all have spells. And I think I described those in my last sort of my after comments to the unboxing episode. So what happens is, and there's a little pad of character sheets. And by little pad, I mean these are like 3x5 index card side style pad of character sheets where you put your name, you put the name of your character, you record the stats of the type of hero you are, and then you can check off body points when you get hurt. You can check off the number of quests you completed, and you can keep track of your potions and magic items and your gold coins. The way you get magic items is there are cards for these artifacts. They're not called magic items; they're called artifacts. But that includes magic weapons and healing potions and a magic wand and things like that. But they are hidden around the dungeon. Not every item is going to be in every dungeon. But it's noted on the maps and the scenarios where they'll find the different types of artifacts that are in the dungeon. But then you got a treasure deck, and whenever a hero chooses to search the room, if they find a treasure, whenever they elect to search the room, they draw from the treasure deck. But mixed into the treasure, there's gold, there's gems of various value. You can find a box of jewelry, or jewels, not jewelry. But there's also a wandering monster card. There's actually several wandering monster cards. And there's a hazard card where you suddenly the stone beneath your feet gives way. You fall into a shallow hole, losing 1 body point or 1 hit point. You climb out and move. Your movement stops. It ends your turn, and then you can climb out and move normally on your next turn. And you put that back in the deck at the bottom of the deck if they get that. After a wandering monster is drawn, after the fight's over, you put that card back in the bottom of the treasure deck. So you got healing potions and stuff in the treasure deck. So those are going to show up in this potential treasure in every dungeon. There's hazard. While you're searching, a hidden arrow shoots from the wall, striking you. Lose 1 body point, and your turn's over. Return this to the bottom of the deck. So a couple of generic traps that just hit you for 1 hit point, which means quite a bit in HeroQuest because these aren't super tough characters. They start off with anywhere from 4 to 8 body points, depending on the class. But it's kind of interesting is the more you draw from the treasure, because the wandering monsters and the traps get recycled into the bottom of the deck, eventually you're going to find all the treasure, and if you keep poking around, you're just going to run into more monsters and traps and hazards. So I think that's a really cool mechanic, and that is one I've thought about incorporating into dungeons. I've seen a lot of pre-published dungeons, particularly they maybe put one trap, and sometimes it's important to have a fixed trap, just like it's important to have a fixed encounter. This room, this monster is in this room. This trap is in this cross-section of hallway. It makes sense for it to be there. And those are major traps like pit traps and things like that, which also can happen in HeroQuest. You've got some tiles to put in pit traps, and the map will show you where to put them. And they're significantly more problematic than just these random, here, take a point of damage hazards. But I thought it might be neat to seed those, do something like that, like just like you roll for random encounters, roll for random hazards. So that, if you're maybe on a roll of a 6-sided die, that may be too frequently. Maybe you'd want to use a larger die. But of course you might get a saving throw in D&D to avoid the damage. Here you just take it. But that's also because you're actively searching for treasure. But I think the assumption in D&D is you're always actively searching for treasure. You're always at least looking around the room and walking around the room. If you're not opening doors and looking under beds and opening drawers and things like that, you're at least moving around the room and looking in all the corners and all the places that are visible. So that might be a neat mechanic to incorporate into a role-playing game when you're doing searching a dungeon or a house or something like that. If they search for secret doors, the secret doors are, of course, already on the map, but the game comes with tiles. You go, oh yeah, you found one right here, and you plop it down where they find the secret door. There are pit traps, which are, again, these are traps that are pre-marked on the map. If the trap is found during the search, Zargon, being the game master, will say that, this piece of floor looks weak, and will point to the square where the trap is located. But they won't put a pit trap on the tile, a pit trap tile on the game board yet, if it's not yet been sprung. So once the pit trap is discovered, a hero can jump over the trap, or they can try to disarm it. So a dwarf can try to disarm it, or after people have acquired gold and between scenarios can buy the toolkit, and then the other types of characters could also disarm it. There are falling blocks traps. Falling block traps are very dangerous. Stepping on one may trigger the ceiling to collapse. If it's found during a search, then Zargon will say the ceiling looks dangerous and will point to the square, but they won't put down a tile again until the trap is actually sprung. You can then attempt to jump the trap, or you can try to jump the square to avoid triggering the trap, or you can try to disarm it. There are spear traps. As a hero, when moving onto a spear trap square, you have to roll a combat die. If you roll a skull, and I'll explain that in a second, you suffer 1 damage. This ends your turn. You basically always suffer 1 point of damage from a trap, but you got the random hazards that are in the deck, and then these other traps that have specific locations are a little more complicated. Yeah, then there are chest or furniture traps. So when you're trying to open a chest or move inspect a piece of furniture, they could be there as well. So how combat works? Well, you've got 2 types of dice. You've got red 6-sided dice that are your typical pipped 6-sided dice. And these original ones are made of wood. They're kind of neat. And of course, the new ones are made of plastic. To roll to move. And then you've got 6 combat die. And the combat die have... they've got 4 skulls. And then they've got the symbol of chaos, which is a fanged skull, and then they've got the symbol of the hero symbol, or a symbol of law, which is a griffin on a shield with the silhouette of a griffin on it. Some people might say it's a lion, but its tail is a little funky for a lion. But then it doesn't have wings, so maybe it is a lion. It's definitely a lion in the new, I think, on the new dice. Anyway, when you roll, the hero rolls to whoever's attacking, whether it's the hero or the monster rolls, and a skull is a hit. And then the other symbols don't mean anything. But then when you roll to defend, then you roll your defense dice. And say the wizard only has 2 defense dice, the elf has 2, the dwarf has 2. Yeah, all the heroes have 2 defense dice, but they have different degrees of attack dice. The barbarian with 3, the wizard with 1, and the dwarf and elf with 2. And so it's very much anybody familiar with war games is kind of familiar with how this works. Is I roll to attack, you roll to defend, and certain of your results, i.e. the defender rolls the shield and symbolic of their side, hero or chaos, negates one of the hits on the other side. So, and you can do this. You can figure out how to do this with regular 6-sided dice as well. If you lose your combat dice, you just say, 1 to 4 is a damage, 5 to 6 is not. When you roll, and then on your defense, you just designate it as either a 6 or a 1 for you on your defense dice. Negates a hit. Same odds either way. 1 and 6. But that's how we had to do it in Fantasy Grounds, because it doesn't have these kind of dice. I had to figure out how to do it with handfuls of 6-sided dice. Anyway, so that's it. I mean, you're crawling around a dungeon. You're trying to find and avoid traps, looking for treasure. Sometimes you've got another overarching objective to defeat a specific monster or to rescue someone who's been kidnapped or lost. And you fight these. It's not a. There's not a great variety of monsters, but again, it's a simple, straightforward game. I hope I've described it adequately. If I haven't, there are tons of YouTube videos that where people are doing live plays of HeroQuest, so go check those out. Yeah, it is. It has a character sheet. It has spells. It has character stats. It has dice rolls. It has treasure and traps and monsters. So it is a dungeon crawling game that kind of has everything you kind of probably get in original D&D without the role-playing elements. And you can give your character a name and a personality, because if they die, you replace them. If Bob the Barbarian dies in an encounter, you replace him with a new, Steve the Barbarian, and he doesn't have all of Bob's loot unless somebody thought to loot Bob's body and carry it out and then give it to their new barbarian next time. But so you replace. You've got your 4 stock characters, and if one of them doesn't make it back from a quest, you just create a new one and start over. So let me know what you guys think if you have any questions. But like I said, I felt compelled just because I'd talked about it so much, and Rob his call there kind of inspired me to go into a little more detail about the game itself. But it is a good, particularly on nights where maybe not everybody has made it. You were going to play D&D or Pathfinder or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay or something like that. And, not everybody's there, and you're like, you know what, we don't want to play without everybody here tonight, or, there's too many people missing. If you've got, just a couple of players that can run 2 of these characters each, you can run through a 1 or 2 Warhammer scenarios, and at about the same time most people devote to a night of role-playing game. So I like a good filler thing to do when not everybody's around, and no, I don't think you get as attached to these characters. So if a different group of players shows up, a month later, and it's not the exact same players that played HeroQuest last time, but again, you don't have enough to play D&D, just start with the last scenario or the next scenario from where you left off the previous time. I think with the new one, I think you're still supposed to use 4 heroes, even though you've got 7 options for the types of for the heroes. but I haven't looked real closely into those new scenarios. May make allowances for more characters. I think if you play with, you can kind of get away with it 3 if the players are really smart. If you go with fewer than 3 characters, you're probably not going to succeed. I kind of think there's probably going to be the opposite effect, and you might be able to just play 5 and do okay with those new character types. But if you put all 7 on the board, then it may become a little too easy. Of course, you can always up the ante by having the traps, putting in more traps or more monsters, and I guess at that point you've become an actual dungeon master because you're tweaking the scenarios and making them your own. And there is a blank map. They give you a blank map of the board where you can sketch out your own scenarios once you've kind of played through all the other ones. So anyway, that's it about HeroQuest. I don't know if that description helped. It was particularly good. This is such a visual game. It's kind of hard to describe it verbally and do it justice. But like I said, there's plenty of pictures and videos you can find online about how HeroQuest is played and what everything looks like. So I'm going to wrap that up here. And as an afterthought for HeroQuest, just because I don't think we made it clear in the unboxing episode, because I got the Mythic tier that included the 2 expansions, there are 95 miniatures in this thing, in addition to the resin cast dungeon dressing and the tiles that kind of you can use to create different arrangements on the game board. So that's 95 miniatures. 95 miniatures. That includes, all told, across the expansions and the stretch goals. For the heroes, that's 2 barbarian figures, 2 wizard figures, mentor, so actually 3 wizard figures, 2 elves, 2 dwarves, a bard, a druid, a warlock, and then Sir Ragnar, who is an NPC. Then there are the dragon, 2 gargoyles, 6 dread warriors, 2 dread sorcerers, the witch lord, 14 skeletons, 8 zombies, 8 mummies, 14 goblins, 18 orcs, and 8 abominations. So 95, let's do a little math here. 149.99 divided by 95. So that's $1.58 per miniature, and it came with the game board, all the cards, and accessories, and dungeon dressing that you can use not only in HeroQuest but in other. You can use it for Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or anything else where you're going to break out miniatures. I think I would refer you to the Dungeon Craft YouTube channel, Professor Dungeon Master, and his Ultimate Dungeon Terrain, where he just uses minimalist pieces, kind of like you would on a set of live theater, where you just got a few pieces and people's imaginations fill in the rest. Some of these things that come in the HeroQuest are perfect for that. Just doors and tables and little things like that. So, yeah, pretty good value for the price. I really do hope that they make it available again for people who didn't get in on the in some form or fashion, didn't get in on the original round of funding. And I would probably invest in another set to have one set of the miniatures unpainted and one that I can sit down and paint, because I really want to paint these guys. But they may retain a little more of their collectability if they're unblemished, new in the box, untouched, unspoiled. And looking at what they're going on for eBay now, I probably should have bought a couple of box sets just to turn around and sell on eBay. Anyway, enough HeroQuest. Well, I think that'll do it for this episode. I want to thank my callers, Jason Connerly, Carl Rodriguez, and Rob, also known as Mignon. Be sure and check out their podcasts, all here on Anchor. They're a lot of fun to listen to. So, everybody enjoy your games. Everybody out there who has HeroQuest, either the old version or the new, enjoy your HeroQuest. And I'll be back later. And that's it for this episode of The Arcane Alienist. I want to thank Dave Bone for the cover art that I use for the episodes. Check out ironseer.com. And the music is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. Thank you for listening. Give me a call sometime through the Anchor app or at the Anchor website, and I'll be back in the future with another episode.